Hello everyone. Today I want to talk to you about the trade negotiations between the US and China. There is a real issue, and there is a false issue. In addition, US media have said that outside of America, a brand new global trade system is taking shape. Right now, it seems like there is a brief period of easing between China and the US, but trade negotiations are still ongoing. Recently, U.S. Treasury Secretary Bessent revealed some new developments in the U.S.-China negotiations. On July 21st, during an interview with CNBC, Bessent first talked about tariffs on countries around the world. He said that before the final deadline for reaching a trade agreement on August 1st, the Trump administration is more concerned about the quality of the trade deal than the timing of reaching an agreement. The United States will not rush just to reach a deal. When asked whether the August 1st deadline for negotiations with Washington could be extended, Bessent said it would depend on President Trump's wishes. However, if the U.S. really implements the tariffs effective August 1st, he believes that higher tariff levels will put greater pressure on these countries, forcing them to offer better deals. When it came to China, Bessent said that negotiations with China would resume soon. He believes that the state of U.S.-China trade is good, and now we can talk about other matters. Unfortunately, China is purchasing large amounts of sanctioned Iranian and Russian oil, and we need to discuss this issue. In addition, he also said that we can discuss another obvious issue, which is that China needs to undergo significant rebalancing. Bessent said that goods made in China account for 30% of global exports, and this figure has not decreased despite the earlier tariff war initiated by the United States. At the same time, a large volume of goods is flowing to countries like the EU, Canada, and Australia. The host asked him whether sanctions related to Russian oil would happen soon. Bessent said that the U.S. Senate is very creative. There are 80 to 90 senators who want to pass a sanctions bill, which includes a clause stating that anyone who buys Russian oil will be subject to secondary sanctions and will face a 100% tariff. He said that Trump single-handedly pushed the tariff agenda, making the Senate realize that tariffs can be used to advance political issues. Bessent also mentioned that if the U.S. imposes secondary sanctions tariffs on Russia, he will encourage Europe to follow suit. Bessent discussed these two issues related to China. The first issue is that if China buys Russian oil, it will face a 100% tariff, but in fact, this is just a false proposition. Previously, the US not only imposed a 100% tariff on China, but even raised it to 145%, but the US itself couldn't handle it and had to negotiate with China to lower the tariffs. Now they're talking again about imposing a 100% tariff because China buys Russian oil. This is just empty talk. Anyway, whenever Trump talks about topics related to Russian President Putin, it's never based on facts. The second topic Bessent discussed was that China needs to undergo significant rebalancing, and this is actually a topic the US genuinely wants to discuss with China. Bessent had already talked about this topic in an interview with CNBC back in May. At that time, he said that apart from not being able to supply China with strategic materials, there are still many areas where we can work together. The US needs more manufacturing, and China needs more consumption, so there is a possibility for both sides to rebalance together. Let's wait and see. For a long time, the US has wanted China to reduce its manufacturing and increase its consumption, so that there would be less competition with American manufacturing and China would buy more American consumer goods. Bloomberg also did a special report on this topic in May, quoting sources who said that Chinese officials are working on a future version of the Made in China 2025 flagship policy led by President Xi Jinping. This shows that while Trump is demanding more factories be moved back to the US, the Chinese side is intent on firmly controlling its manufacturing sector. The report says that China's plan for the next decade will prioritize the development of technology sectors, including chip manufacturing equipment, to promote the production of high-end tech products. In order to avoid criticism from Western countries, this plan may no longer use a name similar to Made in China 2025. Sources say that, in addition, policymakers in China are preparing for the next 5-year plan, which will be implemented starting in 2026, and hope to maintain a stable share of manufacturing in the country's GDP over the medium to long term. This highlights that the economic rebalancing the United States hopes for in China may be difficult to achieve. According to people familiar with the matter, during discussions in China, Chinese officials once considered including a numerical target for the share of consumption in China's GDP in the next 5-year plan. However, the relevant departments currently tend not to do so, because the authorities lack effective means to stimulate household consumption and are unwilling to commit to specific figures. The sources also said that the contents of these plans are still under discussion in China and may undergo significant changes before they are officially released. The 5-year plan will be announced to the public at the next National People's Congress in March 2026. The new blueprint for manufacturing could be released at any time, possibly before or after the next National People's Congress. Bloomberg reports discussions in Beijing indicate China still intends to stick to its strategy of emphasizing advanced manufacturing. This strategy, criticized by the US for contributing to trade imbalances, is a core issue in China-US trade talks. The report states the Trump administration aims to push China toward consumption-driven growth while promoting strategic decoupling through regulations and tariffs. This seeks to return manufacturing in steel, pharmaceuticals, and semiconductors to the US for self-sufficiency. China resists by controlling rare earth supplies as leverage against the US, which blocks China from advanced chips and tech. This can be summed up as follows. First, the US wants China to become a consumption-driven society, meaning it won't compete with the US in high technology and will buy more American products. In other words, letting the US always be the top dog. But that's something China simply can't do. Second, in future China-US trade negotiations, the so-called issue of China rebalancing will definitely be a sticking point. China can promise to buy more American goods and reduce some of the US trade deficit, but it won't make a comprehensive commitment to so-called rebalancing. Given America's track record of raising big issues, it might not necessarily stick to them. Trump's global tariffs aim to change supply chains and diplomatic relations. According to a July 20th Washington Post report, as Trump's tariff negotiation deadline nears, many U.S. trading partners are developing trade relationships that bypass the U.S. market. A global trading system outside of the United States is gradually taking shape. The report says that Trump's trade policies have made business leaders uneasy. According to data from UK-based Haitong Macro, after the Trump administration introduced a series of tariff policies targeting specific industries and products, the average U.S. tariff rate on imported goods has risen from just over 2% in January to around 15%. This is the highest level since the 1940s. If some countries fail to reach a tariff agreement with the United States before the August 1st deadline, the tariff rates could rise even further. Although the scale of the new U.S. tariffs has yet to be determined, it is widely predicted that the tariff rates will be much higher than those of the past few decades. Trump's tariff policies have already caused many American businesses to suffer losses. This month, executives from U.S. food giant Conagra told investors that, due to tariffs on tin plate steel driving up production costs, their company plans to raise the prices of canned foods. Meanwhile, specialty equipment giant Nike is reviewing its operations, seeking to rein in expenses, and plans to implement a targeted price increase this fall. Tariffs have also forced industrial incinerator giant Veolia to split shipments entering the U.S., sending them separately to Canada and the United States. Compared to the previous unified North American supply model, this approach has resulted in a more costly supply chain. Former WTO Deputy Director General Ifu said that the United States is no longer seen as the leader of the world trade system. It has withdrawn, and will do whatever it wants, making its own deals, but it will no longer consider its past obligations. This is a fundamental change. The Washington Post stated that tariffs have become a signature policy tool of Trump, and they are reshaping the economies of developing countries. Tariff policies have also led to some unexpected effects. For example, the United States now relies more heavily on Russian urea, which is a fertilizer commonly used for crops like wheat, corn, and rice. Many countries are trying to develop trade relationships that bypass the US market, including America's European allies. Brett, an executive at quality inspection and compliance service provider Chima, said that Chinese factories are strengthening their ties with European customers. He revealed that in the second quarter of this year, demand from European companies for auditing or inspecting potential Chinese suppliers increased by 5 percentage points, while orders from the United States dropped by 24 percentage points. At the same time, European countries are trying to strengthen ties with other markets to make up for losses caused by declining trade with the United States. In April this year, the European Union and the United Arab Emirates launched negotiations for a free trade agreement. On July 2nd, the founding member countries of Mercosur, such as Argentina and Brazil, together with member states of the European Free Trade Association, including Switzerland and Norway, concluded negotiations on a free trade agreement, which will be signed in the coming months. Breton stated bluntly that, aside from the United States, another global trade system is taking shape. To sum up, first, the alliance system built during the Biden era to encircle China has already collapsed. Trump's tariffs have continually driven allies away, pushing them toward China's side. Second, China has become the leader of free trade, and in the future, global trade will enter a new era